Welcome to the 2017 Winter Brewbound Session here in Santa Monica, California. Thank you all for joining us today. You guys just saw a wonderful animation created by the outstanding Aaron Willett. I don't know if you're in the room, but thank you as always for your work on those animations. As you guys all know, this whole event wouldn't be possible without support from our sponsors, so I wanted to take a brief moment to recognize them by name. Craft Brew Alliance, Santa Monica Brew Works, which hosted the welcome reception last night. Thank you guys. The National Beer Wholesalers Association, Vicinity Brew Software, Sovereign Flavors, Siemens, Live Oak Bank, Brewery Pack, and Markham Homage, as well as Thin Film Electronics. Thank you guys for your support. Without you guys, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. And of course, a huge shout out to the Brewbound team, who worked tirelessly to prepare what you guys see before me today, especially our wonderful events director, Ashley Harding. I don't know if you're in the room, but thank you, Ashley. A big round of applause. She is the one that puts everything together here and makes it work, so thank you. Also want to give a big shout out to my colleague Justin Kendall over here, our assistant editor. He's done a fantastic job this year of managing a lot of the content that you guys see on Brewbound. And without his support, I wouldn't be able to spend time thinking about the conversations that we're going to have today. So thank you, Justin. Really appreciate all the hard work. Big round of applause for Justin. And with that, let's dive in. So as I said, Justin and I have been on the road traveling a whole bunch this year. We've attended a lot of different events, and we've connected with a whole bunch of different folks throughout the industry. And we've noticed a shift in the types of conversations that we're having. It seems like more often we're talking less about beer and more about things like marijuana, sparkling hard seltzer, wine, spirits, Amazon, direct-to-consumer sales, and generally just the ways in which the beer landscape is evolving. So for today, we really decided to go all in on that and to discuss the future of the beer industry in an effort to understand kind of where we've been and where we're going. Right now, the beer category, particularly the craft segment, is going through a pretty big shift. You have large national and regional established companies like Boston Beer and Sierra Nevada that are struggling to figure things out. But there's sort of a mixed bag of results amongst the top 50. You have some folks that are doing tremendously well as well. You've got a whole bunch of new competitors that have entered the fray. You've got taproom-focused breweries that are thriving, breweries that had once found it relatively easy to sell beer far away from their home base when there weren't 6,000 breweries competing for shelf space, have had to go back to the drawing board and get creative. Some breweries have chosen to bring on new financial partners. Just yesterday, we saw that Avery Brewing out of Colorado sold a 30% stake to Mao San Miguel. And others have actually doubled down on their independence, putting a new seal on their labels in hopes of convincing consumers to support indie breweries. It's certainly been interesting to watch, and it's really exciting for us to watch how everyone is preparing for the next phase of industry evolution. But there's still one lingering issue, I think, that's really starting to come to a head finally, and that's that as a segment, beer shipments are still in decline. Through October, beer shipments were down about 1.9% on the year, so that's roughly 2.8 million barrels. And over the last 20 years, the beer category has ceded 35 million barrels to wine and spirits. That's 11 billion servings per year. That's a pretty sobering statistic. It's not all bad news, though. The high-end beer category is growing. Mexican imports are still on fire. And while craft's years of double-digit growth might be gone for good, the segment is still up about 5% on the year. And the good news for everyone in the room is that opportunity still exists. You just have to know where to find it. And that brings us to today, where we're going to spend the next 8 hours thinking about the future and discussing ways that entrepreneurs in this room can identify new growth opportunities and capitalize on them. So with that, I'd like to introduce our first speakers. Ninkasi Brewing has been on one heck of a run since it launched midway through 2006. Over the last decade, the Oregon-based company has grown to about 100,000 barrels and $30 million in annual sales. In addition to now being the 33rd largest craft brewery in the U.S., Ninkasi has also built out an impressive $20 million brewing campus in Eugene, expanded distribution into 12 states in Canada, and I think they've even sent some brewer's yeast up into space. So that's pretty cool. Nice work. None of those accomplishments are as impressive, though, as the decision that co-founder Nikos Ridge made in March of this year, when he actually stepped back from his role as CEO and named Cheryl Collins as his replacement. At the time, Nikos was demonstrating an incredible amount of self-awareness, and he pointed to his entrepreneurial-oriented leadership style as something that was actually holding the company back. Perhaps it was instinct, but Nikos really knew that in order for the company to thrive over the next decade, he needed someone like Cheryl to come in and execute. And now with Cheryl at the controls, Ninkasi has set its sights on successfully navigating a challenging craft landscape that now includes, as I mentioned, almost 6,000 breweries. So here today to share a variety of lessons about managing rapid growth, fine-tuning innovation and investment strategies, and building a rock-solid company culture, our Ninkasi co-founder Nikos Ridge and CEO Cheryl Collins. Please welcome to the stage. Here, I will let everyone know that if you look at the back of your badges or on the agendas, there is information about how to send questions up to the stage. You can text, tweet, or email us. I'll get them up here on this iPad, so please send them up if you have questions for Nikos and Cheryl. These chairs are nice and comfy.
Nice and comfy.
So Nikos, for the folks in the audience that may not be as intimately familiar with the Ninkasi business, can you maybe bring us all up to speed on the last 10 years briefly and just discuss how the company has needed to mature and professionalize as the craft segment has become as saturated and competitive as it is?
Sure. Yeah, the quick version of the Ninkasi story is we started in 2006, but 10 years prior to that, my partner Jamie had been a professional brewer, so he was involved in the industry and just at a point in his career where he felt like it was a good time to start a brewery. So we partnered up, and it's been quite a ride. We've had some tremendous success, a lot of challenges along the way, but we've also grown to a size where I personally feel like, and I think it's shared amongst our team, that we need to operate at the level of our peers for obvious reasons, many of whom have been in business for a lot longer than us, so we're working on that sort of accelerated improvement process internally to become a more mature, more capable company.
And when you made the decision earlier this year to name Cheryl as the CEO, what steps did you take towards working through that accelerated curve, as you mentioned?
We've done a lot of things over the last several years. We just finished the large expansion, which you mentioned in your opening remarks, and that was kind of the end of the sort of building phase that had gone on for basically 8 or 9 years up to that point. And that was where we had really built ahead of ourselves to a degree where we felt like it was time to focus on our internal operational capabilities and developing those. So it wasn't about putting up new buildings and adding more tanks and bringing in new equipment. Now we had that done. It was about how do we operate, how do we work together, how do we strengthen our company and our culture. And that kind of thing, being in the weeds on some of that stuff, is where I tend to get bored and a little antsy. And so noticing that I wasn't necessarily the right person to be driving that, and we worked together, for the last 6 years. So the transition and working as a team, the transition was more about moving me from taking the lead with everyone else supporting, moving Cheryl into taking the lead with us supporting what we're doing. So
yeah, and it's definitely I think a trend that we've seen amongst some of the more established breweries. We've noticed that they've brought in either a new CEO, the founders have kind of stepped back and let somebody take over sort of day-to-day operations in that CEO role. Cheryl, you've been in that role for about 7 months now. How's the transition gone, and what's been your sort of biggest learning stepping into Nikos' shoes, if you will?
Yeah, so far so good. At least I think so. And it's been, I mean, every day learning something new. But I thought about your question, and really the biggest part, the biggest learning transition piece of it is balancing the internal and external demands of the job. Being a CEO is pretty much the one job in the organization where you have that external outlook on what's going on, and it's your role to bring it inside to the organization, but you still have demands from within the organization. So being very methodical about how I spend my time, making sure that it's aligned with what the company's strategy is, making sure it's keeping up with external relationships, but also building the internal foundation.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a little bit. This idea of sort of balancing what you guys are watching and seeing and witnessing in the space with sort of your own internal goals and objectives. I think that there's a tendency for a lot of companies and a lot of entrepreneurs to maybe just rush to whatever the latest trend is, the latest fad is. How do you guys think about balancing the goals that you have, that you've laid out, ahead of time with what might be changing as the year goes on?
It's a great question. Obviously, it's relevant with everything going on and the changes in the industry, but from the beginning, at least what I gather, working with Nikos and Jamie, and we've continued this, is we have to be true to ourselves and our core purpose. So regardless of what's going on in the industry, what we have to figure out is how we make the Ninkasi way of doing that work for us. So, for us, our core purpose is perpetuate better living, and we will constantly use that as our guiding vision for how we do things and how we make decisions. So, yes, the landscape is changing, but I find that exciting because what it means is there's this just new opportunity out there for a new way to do business, and we're open to it. And it's where that innovation piece comes in too. It's not just in the product, but it's in how you operate, how you do business, how you maintain relationships.
Perpetuate better living. Nikos, what does that mean for you guys?
I think we're in a great industry that has an opportunity to do that on a lot of different levels, but it's really just contributing to a higher quality of life for the people that we interact with, whether it be the communities where we're operating or the customers that we work with or the partners that we engage with. And craft beer is fun, and people enjoy drinking beer and creating positive experiences around it together. So we try to embody that into how we make decisions and how we operate as a company.
And what are some of the tangible ways that shows itself in the way that you guys function, specifically in the trade?
We're very, a lot of people in our industry, but we're very supportive of community partnerships and nonprofits. We built our new office to have a specific event space that gets used almost every week for a nonprofit event or a community gathering in Eugene. And just developing those relationships, taking them to a deeper level than just contributing beer, having people out participating in things like river cleanups or beach cleanups or planting trees with Mackenzie River Trust, which is a big partner of ours, et cetera. So really that community partnership is huge for us, and then looking at the experiences that we create and making sure that they're inclusive and fun and positive, have a positive orientation and all of that.
And not that the only reason that you would do that is to sell more beer, but how has that kind of helped attract customers to your brand, and how has that idea of perpetuate better living helped you guys sort of maintain customer loyalty with people who actually sort of embody that as a consumer as well?
I think in supporting what other people care about, and it builds that relationship so that they're supporting what you're doing as well. And I think that's a reasonable expectations for both sides.
Well, it tells people why we're in business, what we stand for, why we're doing what we're doing, what makes us get up every day and compete with 6,000 other breweries out there. And it's just a way to, we get a lot of positive feedback too from our customers on that. They appreciate that we stand for something more than just, here's this great product that we create, but it's also something bigger.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about where the industry is at today and kind of where Ninkasi fits in. You sort of teased it a little bit in the first question that I asked, but everything has matured. Craft is entering this new phase, and you guys are working through this sort of accelerated curve, as you mentioned. Can you just share your vision of the future beer landscape and maybe talk about how you're setting up Ninkasi to remain successful for the years to come, to, no matter what the future might hold?
Yes. I was like, God, that's
Don't
a
all
lot.
jump
That's a
at
lot
once.
Big
of information. I think the industry will continue to mature. I think, we're in a phase where we're going from sort of a startup industry that's had a lot of positive, accelerated growth as we've created a new category in the market, and now maturing into maybe a more traditional version of a typical CPG industry. So with that, it becomes about what are we doing to continue to support the foundations of engaging our customers. And for us, that's a huge focus on a real shift in perspective from sort of Ninkasi-centric, which I think was part of why this transition makes sense. For me, Ninkasi is what we do because it's what Jamie and I started. It's what I've focused on. It's what we've been internally focused in this building phase, and what do we need to do as a company to take the next step and all that. And I think our focus now needs to and is shifting to being more customer-centric. So it's more about what are we doing for other people? What do we need to do to support what our customers are demanding from us? How do we better align ourselves with those things? And I think if we work from the perspective of the craft beer consumer, first and foremost, that benefits all of our other partners in the chain, because it's really about, for the retail customer that we have, it's about creating pull off the shelf. For the wholesale partners that we have, it's about products that perform in the market so that their investments in time and getting those out there are rewarded with good pull through and good velocity. So that's a lot of where our focus and that maturation is coming from, being more customer centric, being more innovation centric, and backing that up with a bunch of different tools and approaches that we haven't historically used.
Yeah. The innovation piece is particularly interesting to me. As you guys have worked to mature as an organization, you have had this renewed focus on the consumer and innovation. Can you maybe elaborate on what that actually looks like day to day as you guys are executing on it? What does innovation look like for Ninkasi today? What did it look like a year ago, and how is it different?
A couple of specific examples. I mean, it used to be just about let's make a beer that we think is cool or that we like and see how it performs in the market, and maybe commercialize up all the way through to putting six-packs out there without a whole lot of feedback early on. And so starting to develop more of an intentional approach around that, because also at our size, and again with the level of competition out there, I think when you put something broad market like that, you want to ensure that it performs, because there's just too much work that goes into developing it, designing the packaging, getting it through the network, getting it onto the shelf, and getting it in front of people. And we've certainly had those misses in the past where something we thought would be great wasn't what resonated. So really starting with a more methodical approach of determining what specifically we're trying to make, doing internal testing, sensory testing around that, working with consumer testing around that, refining, tweaking the recipe, being willing to dump beer to continue to retweak, get it exactly to where we want it, and then put it out there, and in an ideal world, up our percentage and probability of success when it hits. And that's been a big and a positive change for us, and it's actually fun. It puts a little structure around innovation. It doesn't really stifle creativity as much as it helps direct sort of the areas where we're going to be focusing.
So innovation has become less of, this sounds interesting, or this is something that we would want to drink, and more about, what's actually something that can be viable in the marketplace?
Absolutely, yeah. And this is no knock on sort of our brewing team or our internal culture, but someone who's been brewing beer for 30 years may not have exactly the same palate as a new consumer in craft, which is, which is something we've learned over time. We've kind of had an accelerated evolution of our palate development and experimented across many different styles. We may have ended up somewhere that isn't necessarily where the majority of our customers sit today. So yeah, that's an important distinction.
And Cheryl, this renewed focus on innovation and this sort of new approach. I mean, Nikos, you mentioned, being willing to dump batches of beer, large batches of beer in some cases, not just pilot test batches. It comes with sort of a new investment strategy. Can you talk a little bit about how you guys have rethought the way that you guys are reinvesting in the company?
Absolutely. I mean, it comes back to what we were talking about earlier with the customer being first. So yes, of course, there's financial implications to dumping a batch of beer, but there are long-term, much bigger implications in my mind for having a product on the shelf that we're not proud of. So that is a question that we use, whether it's with brewers or anybody else, packaging team. It's, are you proud of this? If you were to deliver this to a customer, a potential customer of Ninkasi for the first time, is this putting our best foot forward? And if it's not, then we will dump the beer. Now, we are confident in our scale-up processes, so it's not like we're just dumping beer all the time. But it is something that we have done in the past, where if we are not proud of this product and we are not willing to, we're staking our reputation on every beer now, and there's more people coming into craft, and so we really have to put our best foot forward. So to us, it's pretty much a no-brainer. If you're being customer-centered, you dump the beer if it's not what you want.
And to be clear, it's not that you're dumping beer because it's of poor quality. It's just not quite to the point where you're ready to slap a label on it and have a brand around it and start marketing behind it.
Correct. So with part of our innovation process, and it's a somewhat lengthy process, but we have basically target characteristics and attributes that we're aiming for. So it's not just taste it, do you like it, but there's actually more to it. It's taste it, are we hitting these profiles, are we hitting these targets? That's what we're measuring for. So there's a very specific beer in mind that we're aiming for that's been consumer tested, and the scale-up process is where that can come up.
And this, I would imagine, limits what you're able to do on the investment side into things like sales and marketing, since you're reallocating a lot of those dollars back to the product innovation side. Why not take a different approach and focus more on the marketing or the building out a sales team or reinvesting in other areas of the company?
Well, I think you have to do all of that. You have to find that right balance for what your needs are in the company. But in terms of with sales and marketing, I mean, we have a really strong marketing team that knows how to build programs around pretty much any product that we're going to put out and generate that pull out in the market. When we talk to our sales team, they want products. They want the innovation. That's actually a big call right now, especially from our wholesaler partners as well. They want to see the innovative products coming out on the shelf. So I see that as an investment into sales and marketing in a roundabout way. But we, of course, always invest in sales and marketing as well. But you have to find that right balance. Yeah,
and at the same time, though, there is you talk about wanting to deliver all these innovative brands to wholesalers, but there's sort of the opposite movement happening where wholesalers are wanting to rationalize their SKUs, brewers are trying to have much tighter portfolios, and some of the one-offs that might be performing well on premise, they're really sort of a headache to manage. How do you guys think about that as it relates to innovation and just kind of your go-to-market strategies and your wholesaler relationships in general?
I think we're not trying to put out a lot of different products with this innovation process. It's about narrowing it down to the most viable. So I think we'll brew a lot of different things and try a lot of different things, but it doesn't necessarily, and part of our process means it's not necessarily expecting every one of them to end up making it to market and trying to be sold. And then to step back a little bit to your previous question, I think your sales and marketing dollars become much, much more effective when the foundation of the beer that you're putting out is much stronger. So by investing in innovation, it may take some resources that could otherwise be spent in sales and marketing, but then the remaining resources invested in sales and marketing to support those beers that are tried and true become much more valuable.
Right. So your dollar goes a little bit further, essentially.
Yeah, you can't push you can push a bad beer, but it's not going to be effective.
Yeah. I sold bad running shoes for a long time, so I know how difficult it can be. So let's talk a little bit about trend spotting and innovation as it relates to innovation and just kind of how you think about the products that you want to create. Obviously, you want to look at things like, us being based in Boston, we see a lot of the sort of hazy IPA, New England IPA, and we see a lot of brands across the country chasing that. How do you sort of temper the excitement to chase something new like a New England style IPA with just the understanding that it has to fit your brand and it has to fit within what you want to be delivering as Ninkasi to your wholesalers and to your retailers and to consumers?
I think let's see, that's a great question. On our end, though, it's less about how do you taper it, but it's more about how do you foster and channel intentional innovation. Because innovation and I think there's a misconception too out there that innovation and creativity are the same thing, but that's not really what innovation is bringing about when we're using the term. What we're talking about is having a very methodical approach to how we're generating new products and how we're going to measure their success in a more objective way, as opposed to that subjectivity that we would do in the past, which is, oh, we drink it, we like it, let's sell it.
Right.
So in terms of trends that we see out there, we of course look at them when people have ideas, when we're doing some type of innovation tournament. We see what is trending within our customers' demands, what they want, and it's something we'll always consider. But in terms of having a pilot system is nice because we can experiment and play around with those things. So it's less about tapering it; it's more about channeling it into the right direction for us.
Yeah. Nikos, future trends that you guys are paying attention to, what's in the pipeline?
Big picture, we're putting a canning line in, so that'll be in by the end of the year. So it's not necessarily innovative, but it's new for Ninkasi, and as cans have emerged now as a pretty core part of the craft industry.
Yep.
After the last several years, we're excited for that, and then we've developed new products, kind of can-centric, to go into those new packages. We're not just duplicating flagship products already in the market to put into cans. We've actually developed new products that we think will be performing in that package and also resonate with the rest of our portfolio in a positive way.
What kinds of products?
We have a lighter beer in cans. We have a new lower ABV cryo hop folk-driven IPA. And then one new package with an existing product, so Pacific Rain, which is our pale, which released earlier this year, and has been successful in 6-packs, and we're putting in 12-pack cans. So
now, will you guys be doing, kind of following the trend of, you mentioned a lighter beer, putting beers into larger pack sizes, like a 15-pack? We've seen a lot of breweries kind of chase after that volume. Is that something that you guys are interested in? And in general, where do you see the trend of volume-driven packages within craft going?
We had that conversation for a long time before before we decided on our package formats, and especially in the Northwest, we looked for any data we could find about how that was performing and how it was working. That's kind of our core business, and there wasn't a whole lot of it, so we did decide to do it. We have one 15-pack, and it's just basically to test out and see how that resonates and performs in the Northwest without a whole lot of other data. Obviously, we see what it does other places nationally, so we'll see what it does.
Is this a positive trend for the craft segment moving into that space? I mean, we've kind of heard both sides of the story here. You have someone like Mike Stevens from Founders who's really bullish on the package, and you have others who are a little bit less excited about the fact that you're delivering essentially 3 extra beers for what is essentially a 12-pack price in some cases.
I think, again, if it's what the customer is demanding, whoever's willing to respond to that demand is going to eventually win the argument. So I don't know that our opinion on whether it is good or bad is necessarily relevant. I think that it has to be the right beer in the right package at the right price. You can't undermine your business to support a volume package, obviously. So it's just an evaluation that probably every brewery has to make differently based on where they're at and what their cost structure is and what their opportunities are.
Yeah. Cheryl, Nikos mentioned using data to start to better predict kind of where things are headed and the moves that you guys want to make, specifically as it relates to the types of products and the types of packages that you guys are introducing. How much more important has data and analytics become to Ninkasi over the last few years, and how much more important will it be moving forward in order for you guys to remain successful and operate a profitable business?
Well, it's become very important to us over the years. We have a business intelligence team dedicated to basically keeping us objective and keeping us smart and making really intelligent decisions, and that's only going to continue in the future. There's enough data out there to give you an idea of what's working in the end. I mean, data doesn't predict the future, we know that, but it can tell you what's been happening in the past. It can spot some early on trends, and it can help you confirm or help you see a decision that you're making isn't really the best path. So it's not the sole way we make decisions by any means, but it's definitely added to our process in terms of adding to that, bringing the data on board to help us, again, either confirm the path that we're going down or, oh, maybe we need to change directions if it's telling us something different.
Yeah, what do companies risk by relying too much on data to drive their business?
Depending on time could come into play, right? I mean, if it takes too long to obtain data, depending on how, like if you're trying to go out and get consumer data and you're going out and doing focus groups, those things can take time. That can slow down the process, is a possibility. The other piece with data is, again, it doesn't predict the future. So there's no piece of data that would have told us, yes, you should launch yeast into space and make a beer out of it. But we did it.
There wasn't?
And it was successful. Yeah, I'm pretty sure the data would have told us no. So you can't let the data be the sole way that you make decisions. I mean, we're human beings, we're not machines. And we're gonna take risks. And ideally what data is doing for us is allowing us to take more calculated risks, because as we get bigger, the ship gets harder to turn and maneuver and more costly, as we talked about with things like innovation and dumping product if we have to. But that would be the biggest risk, is that if you get too focused on the data, you won't take any risks.
Right. I think Elon Musk might disagree with you. We might be machines, I'm not sure. But speaking of machines in the brewery, you guys also have made sort of a conscious effort to kind of look at every aspect of your business on the operations side, and find areas where you guys can kind of reduce your overhead, cut costs, and create efficiencies. Can you share some examples of areas of the business where you've recognized that you can be more efficient, and how you encourage just as a part of your company culture others to identify ways that you guys can operate more efficiently?
Yep. The first 10 years were so heavily growth focused and keeping up with that we it was just kind of get it done, whatever it takes mentality. Like, okay, let's put in another tank here. Let's do this process this way. And you sort of institutionalize a lot of processes that were maybe made in the moment that were good enough to get it done, but not necessarily optimized for what you're trying to do. So having the opportunity now with a more stable facility to go back in and really start to reevaluate the way that we do things, and finding ways to do them better, and finding ways to reduce the cost associated with them, the time associated with different things. So as some examples, and also you just end up doing a lot of things that you don't think all the way through. So whether it's contracting for certain services, or things that you might have needed at one point or sounded like a good idea but really aren't adding any value anymore, you can kind of go back through. And so we started taking a hard look through all of our P&L and asking ourselves, for these certain line items, are these things, what value are these things adding? And there was actually a lot of things in there where there was zero negative impact, just to either stop doing them, take them out, get rid of them, cancel the contract, move on. So those were, we had a lot of low-hanging fruit in that sense. And then operational efficiencies, just, when you're 100,000 barrels, 1 or 2% yield through the year is pretty valuable as an improvement, and that's doable just with some focus on how you're putting beer through the centrifuge, how you're drawing beer out of a tank, how you're aligning your packaging schedule to have certain beers follow other beers, or pushing beer through lines, etc. So it's just a lot of simple, kind of tactical, but sort of focused effort into areas that we hadn't spent a whole lot of time on because we just were focused on other things. To that point, we've seen a lot of improvements.
So two questions. What's an example of some of the low-hanging fruit, one, and two, was this all internally driven, or, did you have sort of outside consultants come in and help you through this process?
Both. We started a continuous improvement initiative, which is based on lean manufacturing principles. So we worked with OMEP, which is part of the sort of federal manufacturing excellence groups, and worked with some food industry experienced consultants to help us get started and put in some tools to really help us drive that performance and how we approached it. And a lot of it comes from engaging people at every level of the organization and giving them the tools and the education and the skills to participate, and the voice, of course, to participate in suggesting and implementing changes that improve their specific area of focus. So it's a kind of one of those forever processes that you continue to do over time, but certainly we've made a tremendous amount of progress since we started it 3 years ago.
Yeah. What has it enabled you guys to do as a result of finding those inefficiencies and cutting them out?
Redirect those resources that are not value add. That's kind of the two big markers in our continuous improvement approach is value added versus non-value added. Is there a way to take things that are not necessarily adding value and in specific from the perspective of our customer and reappropriate those resources in a way that will add that value? So there's been a tremendous amount of resource shifting. A lot of this innovation has come from that, where, hey, let's stop doing this because it's not really doing anything for anybody, and let's take those resources that we're applying over there, whether it's time, money, materials, tank capacity, et cetera, and move it into an arena where we feel like it's actually moving us forward, adding value to someone else, et cetera.
For some of the brewers in the audience that maybe haven't quite gotten to the level that Ninkasi's at, but they want to start thinking about these things, what are maybe a few tricks or a few hacks that you would recommend to some of the entrepreneurs in the room to start thinking about how they might undertake some similar initiatives to look for efficiency opportunities in the brew house and ways in which that they can just operate more effectively?
I think it's really important to go out and meet people in your community, brewers or otherwise, who have been implementing processes like this in their companies. We did that a lot. We went out to wood products companies in Oregon or other manufacturing type of businesses and
outside the industry,
just that have been in manufacturing for a long time and that have developed some of these internal processes that have been really effective for them, learning pitfalls, challenges, opportunities that they've seen in their journey. And it's a pretty strong community, this kind of lean continuous improvement community, so there's probably a lot of resources regardless of where anyone's at, or reach out within the industry to companies who are implementing it. But I think that's a great first step. You kind of start to get a sense of how to do it. For us, probably moved a little too fast in some instances and push things, because it's about fundamentals. It's kind of basic stuff done well is sort of the root of success with it. And, if you move too fast, you can kind of leave some people behind. So we've kind of had to take a step back from time to time and kind of reintroduce the fundamentals and re-go through it. But anyways, the nice thing about it is there's no special skill that it takes. It's just sort of doing the work.
Yeah, rolling up the sleeves and figuring it out.
Yep.
Yeah. In doing all of these things, in kind of rethinking how you approach innovation, in encouraging your employees to, find these opportunities to create efficiencies within the company, I would imagine that has changed just the company culture and, kind of the way that people move through the organization and the way that they just look at the organization in general. Cheryl, that's your sort of bread and butter is, leadership and company culture and really trying to understand the best way to have an organization run smoothly. Can you maybe talk about how this process has functioned at Ninkasi, how things have evolved over the last few years as you've put some of these processes in place, and just how the company culture has changed?
How much time do we have? Absolutely. It's the thing with organizational culture and how we're talking about it, and we had talked about this briefly before. It's important to understand that the way that we're using the word in mainstream nowadays is it's way too much used as a buzzword, and we're treating it as this simple concept. And it's not that simple. Organizational culture is a very complex thing. So when I get the question along the lines of how has the culture changed, it's an interesting question because really the culture is changing every day. It's constantly moving, constantly shifting, constantly morphing. And if you aren't intentional about what you're trying to build, as opposed to approaching it as something that you would change, if you approach it as we're building a foundation or we're creating a movement versus say here's a mandate of what our culture will be, you just continuously build towards that. And so when Nikos refers to continuous improvement, what we look at is, okay, there are these skills and there's these tools that we want people to learn on how to make some improvements and efficiencies throughout the organization. Where a cultural approach takes you is look at what mentality and what behaviors need to exist for those things to be true. Because that is where things on the continuous improvement front fail in most companies is they think, oh, these are simple tools, I'll just teach my staff, they'll go out and do it, and they'll save us money. But that's not what it is. For us, what one thing that we look at is, we envision the day where anybody who comes to work at Ninkasi, it becomes this amazing problem solver. That's a question you'll hear us use all the time at Ninkasi is what problem are you trying to solve? In the world of continuous improvement or in the world of culture, that is a required question that every conversation should start with. So it's similar when I get the question of what's the Ninkasi culture like? I'm probably the worst person to be able to describe that as a CEO. I have a blind spot. I'm fully aware of it, and it frustrates me because it's such a topic that I'm fascinated by. But in reality, you can't even answer that question because culture is so big. It needs to be it has to have a frame of a problem. So what business problem are you trying to solve? And then you can look at culture and how it's either helping or hindering. But culture also isn't either good or bad. It just is. You hear that a lot with, oh, is your culture good? Is it bad? It just kind of is. And there can be elements of things that are good and bad. But culture as a concept, it's forever changing, forever morphing, and we are constantly doing work on the leadership front to take pulses on it and see what's going on. And even being that intentional about it, it's still incredibly challenging.
How much does what's happening in the space in general influence or impact just the culture within Ninkasi? And I mean, I'm not sure that the stuff that we write really helps any of that. Some of the gray skies and some of the reports that come out, but I would imagine that just watching the space as somebody who's working on the packaging line, or somebody who's out in the trade selling, or somebody who's tasked with marketing, that can influence the way that they kind of behave within the company or interact with the Ninkasi brand in general. So how much does what's happening in the space impact company culture?
Amazing. It's a huge impact. One of the definitions out there of organizational culture has to do with how you internally react to external factors. So as an organization, what's going on, I mean, as much as some companies want to think, oh, I'll just weather this storm or whatever's going on in craft, you can't. It's impacting you because you have, well, first of all, you have a team of salespeople who are out there every day seeing what's going on out there. And to your point, I mean, everybody has access to information now, but how we respond to that has a huge foundation in how we establish our culture.
How have you guys responded to, I guess some of the doom and gloom that's been floating around over the last year or so?
Well, I think because that is a tough one for sure, but again, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. It's remembering why we get up every day and fight this fight, perpetuate better living. It's what does that mean for us? We choose to come to work and we choose to be part of this community that is striving to do something bigger than themselves, and that inspires people. And so it's not so much about, it's how do you light the fire within people and get them inspired and want to come to work every day in the midst of everything going on, and remembering that we have something to offer our customers. We have a reason for existing, and we want to keep fighting for that reason.
Yeah. You mentioned having some blind spots as a CEO. Nikos, that was part of what drove your decision to step back, was recognizing that there were things that you just saw differently than somebody else in the organization. Can you touch upon those and maybe talk about some of the areas that you were a little bit blind to when you were CEO?
I'm pretty sure I knew everything when I was CEO, so I think I don't
Me
know
too,
how
yeah.
to answer that.
And I'm not the CEO, so.
Yeah, I think it was that that personalization of the lack of objectivity was probably the biggest one for me, right? When you carry something from sort of an idea in your mind to this pretty significant reality that exists, and very connected to Ninkasi, very Ninkasi centric, very that was the important thing to me, and it still is. But it was hard for me to get outside of that box. I was so internally focused that was a big one, just moving into that external focus, which I definitely thought was necessary, and knowing that there are other people who could implement that more quickly probably than I could.
Yeah.
Because I had the awareness that I didn't have around it.
How much can those blind spots set a company back if you're not paying attention to them?
I mean, it's everything, really. I think, especially in an industry that's changing this dramatically, this quickly, those blind spots can leave you far behind if you're not addressing them quickly enough, and you're missing key important parts of what you need to understand in order to stay up to date with how things are changing.
Do you think there are companies out there today that are not addressing some of or I guess I should say leaders within companies in the craft space today that are not addressing some of the blind spots that may be holding them back?
I mean, I'm sure it's happening in our organization on some level, and it's probably happening in all organizations on some level. So yes, absolutely. I think we are doing things and taking steps to help us to avoid the negative outcomes from that. So I think the way that we're approaching it is positive for our future. And I can't speak to other companies, but it does exist. I think if you don't think you have any blind spots, I would be very concerned. So,
Cheryl, for the ones that maybe aren't paying close enough attention to that, what do you think is going to happen to those companies?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, it's to what Nikos was saying. Statistically speaking, it's out there. I mean, they're called blind spots for a reason. Not everyone's going to see them. But I think about when I made the transition into the CEO role, I had a lot of people from the outside, other CEOs, offer advice, words of wisdom. They imparted upon me, and a theme I heard from people was, "Oh, everyone's going to tell you what you want to hear." We don't have that problem at Ninkasi. People aren't necessarily willing to or wanting to tell me just things that are going to make me happy. But I am constantly looking for that. I am constantly seeing, are we getting the right amount of feedback? Is it accurate? And it's the same thing with our wholesaler partners, same thing with our customers. Are we genuinely listening? And I think that's how you can combat blind spots. Are you hearing what you want to hear? Is it just confirmation bias? Or are you actually being critical of yourself and your performance and of the company's performance? So the key has to be some active listening and trying to be mindful. But it's definitely out there. I know a lot of other CEOs who are talking about it for sure.
Yeah. As a category, do you think craft is as critical of itself as it could be?
I think 30 years of consistent double-digit growth might lead you to be slightly less critical than would be healthy, maybe, but it's starting to turn back that way. And to your point, does the external factors impact the internal approach? I think, yes, it does, obviously, and also I think it's a positive, because I think it puts a more of a incentive behind understanding the need for change. Versus if everything's, we're up another 20% this year. Cool, we're up another 30% this year. There's no motivation or incentive to try to focus on how to do things differently. And that is now a really important part of, I think, what a lot of people need to do, and especially, looking internally what we are doing.
Yeah, it feels like it would be pretty easy to kind of lull yourself to sleep on some of that growth, just assuming that it's always going to be there. And I think there are some companies that are starting to figure out, if they haven't already, that it's not like that. And that was the case for Ninkasi last year when you guys didn't grow to the same extent that you had been in the previous years. What was that process like, and how are you guys rebounding from it?
We fired our old CEO.
That guy was a real pain in the ass.
Yeah. So, and we had implemented some, in 2014, once we finished our expansions, when we started to implement some of these just improvement and change methodologies. So it's really kind of doubling down on those things and recognizing and being sort of glad that we had already started down that path. So it wasn't a complete shift, but it was really resonated for us about how important it was to a higher degree at that point.
Well, it comes back to what you were talking about before about we have to be critical of ourselves. And we did. We had a lot of very early successes, double-digit growth for quite some time, and we have to take a step back right now and say, okay, what is going on out there? How are we adapting to this? It's not about just reacting, but we want to respond in kind in the Ninkasi way. And so it's having to be critical of yourselves.
Yeah. Well, what's the biggest headwind in craft right now?
In what respect?
Just in terms of future growth and the challenges that face craft brewers today. What are sort of the biggest headwinds that you guys are paying attention to? I know on-premise has been a bit of a struggle for you guys, but maybe just touch on some of the areas that you guys are watching really closely, some of the things that you guys are grappling with, and what you're doing to address them.
I think looking at that's different answer for every tier. Certainly just the number of breweries, the amount of SKUs, and how that evolves, and making sure we're positioned for our business model to be strong as a part of that evolution, whether it's SKU rationalization or sort of a return to sort of a core focus and not just as much volume, as much variety, but back to kind of tried and true, things like that. But I think, the big headwinds are we've just, entered a new phase in the industry. I think that the growth rate overall, to the point of what you're talking about in the opening remarks for beer in general, has not been strong. And now that craft has kind of expanded to a point where it's pretty well solidified in the market, we'll just look at a little bit of a different industry ahead of us.
Yeah. Nikos, when we were prepping for this, you talked about shifting your thinking from being an expert to being a professional. And I think the quote that you gave me was that you're a professional if you create success, and you're an expert if you think you're right. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Yes, and those are just kind of words that I chose to illustrate that point, but it goes a little bit to sort of relying on sort of these past trends to think that you've got it all figured out. And I think, just I'll just use myself as an example. It's easy when you grow a brewery from 0 to 100,000 barrels in 10 years to think, you got it kind of figured out, you did a pretty good job. But it's really about how you did, yesterday, how you do today that makes you a professional. You can't look to the past and say, I'm good at what I do because of the past. I think to have a professional perspective, you need to say, what denotes whether I'm good at what I'm doing today is what results it's actually creating. And for our industry, I think that'll be a little bit of a shift, because there's a lot of this is the way it's always been done comments that have come up over the years, or this is just how we do it in this industry, and that just doesn't work moving forward.
Yeah. There are a lot of ways that the industry has operated in a very traditional fashion, and some of that is being disrupted. Just thinking in general about three-tier dynamics, things like direct-to-consumer sales, the emergence of e-commerce, which we're going to get into next. How are you guys starting to think about those new opportunities, be it, Amazon in your backyard, or increasing your sort of direct-to-consumer sales initiatives? What's Ninkasi doing to look towards those future opportunities?
Well, everything's on the table right now. It goes back to looking at how we do business and how we want to do business in the future and what's going to make the most sense for us. And it's being open-minded to things that I think 5-10 years ago we may have been like, no, we're never going to do that. And it's just taking a new approach and being willing to try, being willing to fail, being willing to improve, and then continue that cycle all over again.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly going to be interesting to watch how it all unfolds for you guys. A couple audience questions that came in while we were chatting. Not sure if we addressed all these, but one was how you communicate your mission, vision, and purpose and core values to your team, and what impact that has on culture, and does it help reduce turnover?
Okay. How do we communicate? That's a tricky one. It has to work into everyday language all the time. It's not just one answer. You have to approach it with, what are the 50 ways that I can get this message across? I think the biggest mistake that I have seen other people make in other industries and environments is when, again, they treat culture or even core values as a mandate, and they just put a poster up on a wall, which we do have a poster, but it doesn't stop there, and it can't just be about that. It's how do you live the words? Do you have recognition that goes into it? How are new employees oriented in it? You have to look at that entire employee experience and ask, where are they hearing about this? Where are they seeing it behaved? And as a leader in the organization, am I rewarding that behavior, or am I ignoring that behavior? Because at the end of the day, words mean very little, because words in email alone just don't cut it. I do believe it helps with the turnover challenge. It's about, again, with turnover, it's about finding that right healthy amount of turnover. But in terms of retention, which I think is probably what we're really talking about here, in terms of how you retain your high-performing people, you want them to be people who are aligned with your core values. And as long as you are living that message every day in everything that you do, and again, looking from within and having that awareness to say, did I do that, this week, this month, this year? If I'm to say, yeah, these are our core values, this is our core purpose, I should be able to put pen to paper and say how I can demonstrate what we have done, and that should be pages upon pages of things. So it's constant communication, and it absolutely helps you with retention.
Yeah. And then another question came in about just your innovation process. With a more lengthy and structured innovation timetable, how do you find inspiration to identify trends far enough ahead of time to stay relevant?
So we kind of have a two-tier approach to innovation. There's certainly no lack of creativity, and we have continuous sort of open development with piloting and with brewer creativity. So there's a lot that still exists from just that sort of unfettered creative aspect. The innovation piece is, again, more around the process of how we determine what things get more broadly developed for larger scale releases. So it's about finding the right balance. And yeah, it is definitely a balance. You don't want to go too far into structure and process and lose the creative piece, but you need something to help guide the creative piece, or you can just be going in too many different directions all the time to get anything moved forward. But yeah, I think when we started our innovation process, we asked everyone, who was involved in the stream of activities to get something from concept to the shelf. And I think when we asked everybody how much time do you need to do your part of the process, and then we added them all up, it was like 18 months or 2 years or something. We're like, nope. So, cutting that down to how do we get that to work quickly enough, but with the right amount of steps to be successful. So it's just that balance.
Yeah, an 18-month innovation timetable isn't going to cut it in craft.
Not going to work.
We're already on to the next thing at that point.
Yeah.
Awesome, guys. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it. Big round of applause for these guys. Thank you. Thank you.